Good evening, everybody. We'll get underway. My name is Colleen Fitzpatrick, and I'm the Executive Director at the Rotary Center for the Arts. And welcome to our Art Talks. I'm happy to see so many people here. I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement to say that the Rotary Center for the Arts and the Kelowna Visual and Performing Arts Center Society acknowledges that we are situated and operate on the unceded and traditional territories of the Silks Okanagan people on this very beautiful land. Our Art Talks are an opportunity for artists and art leaders to have a conversation with our Kelowna community, for creatives, for the curious, or for anyone that would like to join us. And so tonight's guest speaker hails from Calgary. Denise Clarke is a performance artist, and she was introduced to the Rotary Center for the Arts by Neil Cager.
Thanks, Colleen. So welcome, everybody. This is an odd experience. I don't know if I've had this yet, hosting a Zoom in this fashion. I've taught online, but this is new. So what we'll do is I will first of all just introduce the Denise that I know, and then we'll move on to some questions. We'll talk about devising work and dance and stuff like that, and then we'll get to some questions at the end. So first of all, Denise and I met sometime in the 70s, sometime in the late 70s in Calgary, when we were both doing our sort of a rebellious thing and being artists. Before we met, though, Denise had been a dancer really most of her life, and had been at the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. And correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, but you went to the Royal Winnipeg Ballet School, or is correct? Yeah. And
it was called then the pre-professional program.
The pre-professional, which I think, correct me again if I'm wrong, but you were very tall. So in order to be able to do this, you would have to be, just incredibly skinny and very unhealthy. And I think that was part of what made you leave that particular stream and then kind of move out on your own as a dancer choreographer. Is that right? Am I getting that stream? Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that brought you back to Calgary. Those were 70s. There was a lot of this, dance and dance theater stuff going on in the States with Twyla Tharp and the Judson Church people. So I mean, I think you were a little bit in that territory with the dance training and then looking toward creating your own, devising your own work and creating your own work. So I guess my first question for you, first thing, maybe you could just run us through a little bit of your, how did that all happen? How did One Yellow Rabbit come together? Because Denise created a company in Calgary, then later we worked together. We actually got a little award, a Dora Award together for a show back in the 80s. But why don't you just talk us through how you from Calgary created this career that in fact went across Canada and internationally, and you didn't ever move to an urban center. So can you just give us a little sketch?
Well, my memory of us meeting is the 70s, but the late 70s. And the work you're talking about, I think that all began to emerge more strongly in New York, the dance theater world in the early 80s. And it began to influence me quite strongly. And I was kind of coming from a ballet background. When I really busted out. And with you, we had much more of a punk ethos. It was all DIY, and we were definitely in a very cool position in Calgary. In those early days, the scene was very small, and it was made up of actors, directors, performance artists. Colleen did mention I was a performance artist. I would never have thought of myself that way, Colleen. Such a specific kind of performance track that I really wasn't following so much. Although with Neil, I did show up in a lot of performance art. And but anyway, my work in as a dancer took me into making my own work as an independent choreographer and performer. And then around the same time, some colleagues and dear friends here in Calgary And again, that whole scene, it was poets and rock musicians and the indie music scene and writers and photographers. And we were all jammed together in this kind of a very fortuitous place, in that there was a blank canvas. So, you know, to my mind, it was perfect, because I wanted to do what I wanted to do after a very regimented life in the ballet. And Calgary offered that to me. And the same thing was happening with the founders of One Yellow Rabbit. And I immediately began working with that company in the very early 80s, 81, 82. And they were theater makers, but not really, I don't know if anyone even graduated theater school or anything. And when I came on board, there was a strong desire to include clown elements and outdoor spectacle-like elements in the work of the company. And that wasn't my jam. So very quickly, I was invited to begin taking charge of the physical dimension of the company. They were very interested in making physical theater, is what we called it then. And it just meant that there was it was devised work, but it was a very strong emphasis on the physicality, a choreographed element to most shows, very stylistic presentation in the acting, naturalism in the acting, layered on very strong physicality in the body and in the structure of the work and how it was presented. And that the two careers went parallel for quite a long time, until I was 30 years old, at which point I decided to focus strictly on theater and leave the parallel life of the dance world in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you say leave the dance world, what that's something I wanted to talk with you about. Like, what is happening with dance?
What the hell?
What is going on in the dance world?
Well, at that time in dance, it was a very snobby scene in Canada. And it was just small enough that it was, in fact, there was a few people working in the East, as we used to call Central Canada, in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. And they were running the game. And the game at that time excluded a Western Canadian, an ability to relate to the work we were doing in the West, in Vancouver and in BC, but very much so in Calgary, and Saskatchewan wasn't even mentioned. And I really began to resent it. And I was at the Canada Dance Festival at that time, and I was doing, I did a show of mine, and it had a comedic element in that I was on stage the whole time and I spoke and I introduced my pieces as they came along, and it had a comic thing happening with it. I was doing almost, let's just say the audience was laughing a lot. And then I would dance, and then I would present the next piece, and I would set it up, and I would make lots of jokes, and people would laugh, and it did very well, but it was unreviewed and unattended by any of the international producers, because the producer of the festival had deemed what I was doing a little too, in her words, it's a bit cute. Now, I'm nearly 6 foot tall, and if there's one thing I'm not, it's cute. And so I was, I just checked out that whole vibe of the dance world, which I thought I was topping them in terms of snobism, because I thought they were super square. To not be more inclusive and to not get that it wasn't just cool stuff from Belgium that was cool in those days. Everything was up for grabs. And because I had a comedic element in some of the work I was doing, just in the way I would talk, the dances weren't comedy dances, but the setup was. She was very embarrassed by that for me. And I was very embarrassed for her for being embarrassed for me. And I just thought the whole thing was a little bit ripe. And I just thought, nah, I'm out. Because that was not happening in theater. Theater was much hipper and much more accepting. And there was no rules, and people weren't going, you can't do that in dance. And in dance, they were saying that. Like, you couldn't be funny.
Yeah.
You actually, and to this day in modern dance, you got to be careful. People will be, I still see it, very serious. And I hope I'm not offending anyone in the modern dance game who might be listening, but you know, I just, sometimes it breaks my heart because I've seen young choreographers pull their punches and take what was maybe potentially a very interesting and entertaining piece and turn it into something that isn't. And when I've talked to them about it, they've indicated that they're very nervous of appearing literal is a word they use a lot, and or obviously comedic, which I find very interesting.
So this has gone from the dance world of a ballet, where the codification of behavior is really strict, like everybody is learning how to do exactly the same thing, and then the dance world moved into a more sort of expressive, where the code of behavior, the code of the movement wasn't already predetermined, but you had to create your own language. And when you look at what's going on in the dance world now, where people do talk, where they do everything that a performer can do in a contemporary dance piece, you'll see it. They'll talk, they'll sing, they'll dance, they will act, they will, what do you think about that, where it's gone?
Well, now all I care about is how talented and skilled the practitioner is. I mean, if they're amazing and they know how to speak text, and they know how to, how to deliver a song. I don't even care if they are a singer, but if they know how to deliver a song, if they know how to or incorporate their elements, I'm all for it. There does tend to be a strong tendency in contemporary dance to be oblique still. Like, it's still, I mean, sometimes when I'm asked for, I'm asked to come and view a piece by a colleague. And if my note might be something like, are you intending that to be funny? And they're very nervous. It's like, well, it's not that it's funny. It's like, oh, because it could be, and it could be a lovely, amusing moment, but it's strange, or I don't know what's going on. And there is a very strong hesitation about revealing any code for the viewer to understand what they're watching. And that's just not how I make work. I am also, way older now. And so I really like letting the audience in. And then I'll take my chances with how oblique or not that I am.
So so that sense of mystery that is cultivated by this obscure language, like we're talking about dance that, vocabulary that dancers find or performers find, which is perhaps for them very, very personal and meaningful, but in terms of how it communicates to the audience, it's quite obscure. And we look at it like, you're watching a ritual from an unknown group of people from somewhere else, and there's a strange sense of being kept deliberately confused.
Well, there sometimes is, and it would be different again if I thought the artist was even really clear about what they were doing with that. They were using it, but quite often I just feel like it's a fear that they're operating with, a fear of appearing in any way foolish. It's quite a serious form. And, the great contemporary dance artists, no problem, because they have such a deep understanding of their form, and they are delivering you this true abstraction and this true understanding of the history of contemporary dance, be it only 100 years old, but, you're watching it move through its actual dimensional form, and it can be powerful. but sometimes the dancing or the quality, the technique doesn't maybe match the concept. And again, for me, it's just like, you know, it should be, if you don't have strong dance technique, then maybe you're not, you know, in the dance game, because I'll watch any fabulous dancer dance.
So the virtuosic, the demonstration of skill is like circus, like opera, and ballet, same thing. The ability to do extraordinary things that we can't do. I mean, me speaking about, you know, me as
Speak for yourself, Neil.
yeah, you can, but you know, right. Hey, I can get my leg right up there too. See, there it is.
Everybody now.
Everybody, get your legs up. Right. So
No, but it's that's the word I'm looking for. You know, a virtuosic element included. Then you start to buy yourself a lot of time with an audience, so you can bring them with you in your virtuosic display, or the use of virtuosity to communicate you know, powerful ideas or subtle ideas or emotions and things that are really of value to me as a viewer, and I think to most audiences. And then if it's a little bit still obscure or anything, you know, maybe you might give much more permission. But if it's just all kind of on a level of interesting movement, but not, wow, that movement, you know, I think you're really asking a lot of the actual dance form of dance.
So there's also another thing about dance. I mean, we dance as a culture. There is a social aspect to the dance world, and I find that's changing. How we dance with each other. What is social dance? I mean, obviously right now, nobody's touching each other in public. I mean, from what I've seen anyway, we're not doing that right at the moment. But when we do that social dance is no longer, I mean, there are places where it comes back. You know, you have at the RCA, there are social dance, a rumba, and I'm not sure. There's a bunch of
tango classes and
that kind of stuff going on. But for the most part, we don't dance much as a culture. We don't make music together and dance together. How do you feel about what kind of influence does showing dance to people? How does that integrate them? Like, is there a place where that is community outreach, like bringing people into the dance world? Like, where does that exist, that sort of the social dance, the amateur and the virtuosic, the skilled, like how does your work engage that all?
Well, you know, for me, they are different, but I think one has to make a lot of space for social dance. And so that just means literally making sure that people are encouraged to just move in their bodies. And so as a culture, I think we've probably moved away strongly from, you know, dancing in the streets. And that's the best way to do it is, you know, gatherings in parks and street dances. I mean, the most fun I have with social dancing these days, because I don't go to clubs, is the festivals, going to music festivals and just seeing the most fantastic, joyful dancing of people really lost in their own, you know, passion for dance and music. And so, you know, and in different cultures, of course, are much more, still much more present. I mean, if you go to the festivals of Latin music or African music here in Calgary, the dancing's fantastic and it's everywhere, you know, within the festival grounds. And, you know, we just gotta, please God, we just gotta get back to that as a general culture by always making sure that there's space to dance. And I see that people will. You know, I can encourage people whenever I've incorporated it into my own shows, people would love it. They'll join right in as long as you can set it up right, as long as it's not like putting someone on the spot, but just letting them do their own thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hopeful.
Oh, it would be so wonderful. I mean, the idea of I hope this summer to just put out random emails saying, you know, I'm going to a park on this day, and you'll see someone dancing in that park if you want to join me. Just to see if people just show up with their headphones and just it would be so fantastic to me to see, you know, 50 people in a park with their headphones on, fully abandoned and really in socially distant manner.
Yes, of course, very responsible. Yes. So okay, so that kind of behavior, this is like your practice. You would call this, I would imagine, that
Well, not that social aspect anymore. No, I don't practice, but well, no, not nowhere near enough.
Oh, okay. But I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you describe your practice? Like from, you know, what do you do? What is the discipline that you cultivate, and how does that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, with my practice, and I'm really big on it, as you know, and as I know you are, is to make sure that I incorporate. I have a full yoga practice, and I use a lot of music, and so I let music guide me, and I respond to it. And I use that to guide the way I approach my exercises. And I make sure that that there's walking. And when I walk, I try to incorporate rhythm in my walking. And I dance in my kitchen. But my physical practice is fairly sacred to me. And I use it as a, it's all connected to a place of meditative place, even though if you sometimes were to see me, you would see it did not look or sound meditative, because there would be music on and I would be responding to it rhythmically and with a lot of authenticity to what the music was cueing me. But I will use that to go deep in the body, because, you know, as you know, Neil, after this many years of practicing anything over and over, repeating physical exercises, your body has such deep knowledge of where it needs to go and how it wants to correct. And one thing as I'm aging that I'm really interested in is making sure that I get really more and more into the subtleties of movement. So that's the big deal for me as a getting to my senior years, performer and practitioner, is nuance and subtlety. Mm-hmm. You know, I still absolutely love to discover things, but the more specific and refined I can find it from the inside out, the better it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
The idea of the devotion. That's where I was kind of thinking we might go with that, the discipline and the sense of being, of the practice itself, the spiritual or the sacred, that it's the position of the artist as devotee, that there is something, regardless of what our financial circumstances might be and how we are engaged in it at the moment, but the practice of doing this thing that we do, that we find, we embody things, that there's something, there's the art church thing, right? There's a devotee in the art church.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we at One Yellow Rabbit, Blake always corrects young people that we're either teaching or working with who'd call what we do an industry. And he always corrects them and says, it's not an industry, it's a pursuit. And I always call it a devotional craft, because, you know, I've been incredibly privileged in that I've actually have made my living, not a superb living, but, you know, I haven't had to work at another job. I've been able to combine all my skills as a choreographer and a theater maker and a writer and a director and actor and blah, 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 and a teacher, all to make sure that I can stay in this realm in my work. And it means so much to me because it's it's how I am well in the world. And it's how I can perhaps maybe be of service to others is through my performance or my ability to help them with what they would like to perform and or share, but also to assure and reassure those around me that, it's okay to be, to have a quiet, creative practice that is not necessarily for the public. And in fact, that it can be a very beautiful and powerful thing that is life affirming and just makes the quality of our lives soar. So, it's very, very important to me. And I've considered the great success of my life that I'm still able to do that.
Yeah, I like what you said there about somehow being of service. There's something very paradoxical in the theater world where we are encouraged, not deliberately perhaps, but whatever, to want to be the star, to have all of the attention directed to your own personality, which destroys a lot of people, because one of the things that makes things work as in the theater world is that you are actually not yourself, that it isn't about you. And that, yeah, it's a paradoxical thing.
Well, it is. I mean, I think it's essential because when you're a younger artist, you get wrapped up in the psychological trickery that is the ego, moving you onto the stage and standing in front of an audience and being so deeply affected by people coughing or, the neurosis of our lives as performers can be, it's such an incredible thing if you can actually last in this pursuit, because one day the ego just goes, it just floats away and you realize, oh God, what a bad roommate the ego is in this job, because strangely, as soon as I realized it wasn't about me, that it was really truly about the rehearsal room and then the audience and then the material, it was just the project, and that I was just the servant. It was like, oh, this is way more fun, way better, and a much nicer way to live one's life. And then it just starts encouraging you, because that's a genuine satisfaction, is to not be going like, did they love me? To get away from that. If you've achieved some kind of notoriety like you and I have, then you realize after a while, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's always you can always want more. Right?
Yeah.
But I think we might be spared in the theater world and the dance world, because it isn't the cinema, it's not film, and it is about being in the place. And how many people can you really get in one place and they can see the stage? So maybe we're lucky that it's not upscalable, the live experience.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, like the large scale, even theater, again, I really love working in it when I'm choreographing. If I choreograph an opera, say, or a large piece of musical theater at one of the big festivals or something like that, I really enjoy it, looking at the bodies from in scale. But I'm always terribly disappointed to move from the rehearsal room, especially with opera, into the big house, because there's just nothing like listening to voices with the piano, and you're hearing those unbelievable instruments, and it's so intimate and so powerful. And then you move into the big house and it's like, oh, are they going to turn them up? Like many years ago, my first opera that I ever did, when we moved into the theater, and I was like, I went to the artistic director, whose name was Hoos Mostad, at the Vancouver Opera, and I was like, I can't hear them. And he went, yeah, I know. And I said, no, but what are we going to do? How are we going to fix it? And he was like, shh, don't tell them. And I was like, don't tell them, because the orchestra had started. It was the Sitzprobe. And I was like, and then I realized, well, just sometimes you won't hear some of the singing. And they were all like, I was like, oh. Because that was what was absolutely extraordinary in the rehearsal room, was like these voices. I was like,
yeah,
now
which is like, you know, the kind of work that Peter Brook did with Carmen. It made Carmen into a chamber opera, and everybody sat in incredible, you know, very close to the stage, and you had those voices, you know, those people were right in your lap. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Yeah.
yeah.
We're at 8:04. I want to talk about one other thing before we get to questions. And I have plenty of questions too. So if there aren't any, I'll just continue to ask them.
Okay.
But
Okay, Neil.
okay. So yeah, we've talked about this, and I want to bring it up. So we've got in the theater practice, we've got this, you know, you've done this a lot, mask work, the kind of character work where you actually play somebody else, someone who is not you. And in the there's a lot, you know, going on in discussions, in particular at universities, of course, about representation. And, you know, is it okay for me, for example, white male dude, to perform as a woman? Well, yes, because that works in the drag scene. That's okay. But could I act as a Black character and make myself look Black? Or could I act as a, you know, could I put a mask on? Would that be okay? And I think we probably would say, it's not the moment, you know, this is probably, you know, like that might be not, it might not be the time. But would it be okay to have a Black actress playing King Lear, for example? Well, yeah. I mean, I think everybody would go, yeah, you know, cool choice right now. So I just wondered if you would risk going into that region of representation in the theater world, and what we are allowed to do, who we are allowed to be, and, you know, that kind of question,
Well,
particularly with reference to masks and stuff like that.
well, it's, you know, it's pretty tricky territory. And, you know, it's much like for me, it's a very sensitive time. It's all about, it's not about the issue as much as it's about the time frame. Because as this pendulum has to swing back and has to deal with these systemic issues that, you know, I know we're all getting a little fatigued with some of these terms, but the more reading you do and the more time you spend with even the great literature, and you see the level of casual racism that just is like in every major piece of literature and in every film, and in, you know, you just, sometimes your heart does break and you realize, yeah, it's bad and it has to shift. But I'm not one to say, so throw away those books and those films. You know, I think it's just super essential to use them to as reference points. And I think as the pendulum swings through this correction period, it is necessarily going to be a period of overcorrection. And we just have to accept it, because there might be nothing worse than going, well, I am going to play Othello. I just, you know, I really love that role, and I think I can, I think it's really important that I do it. Well, it's like, well, no, then you would just be an insensitive idiot. And, you know, you really would. It would be like, what were you thinking? Because things will shift again and be more relaxed. But right now it's deadly serious stuff. And with the identitarian politic that is motivating and leading the way in this whole culture war, I am largely sympathetic. And I'm also, I find it scattershot and grim. And sometimes it's the lack of the, you know, ability to be light is such that we just have to be, we have to let this time just be. And for me, it's like, at what time, when can you make the joke after someone dies? This is a period of time and change that we just have to be extremely sensitive. And as elders, we just have to listen to the pain and the anger and understand that our day, where we were not about gaining resources and power, quite the opposite. Our game was not identitarian and was the opposite of it. It was, so, for in that punk ethos, it was so much more about releasing yourself from identity, releasing yourself from who you are, how you were, what your culture is and what you are assigned in this world, and determining for yourself any rules you want and changing them as regularly as you want, and eschewing power and resources, and being of the poor theater, which was an entire movement that I don't have to explain to you, but maybe to some of the listeners, that it meant you're literally of the poor theater. You don't even want to be part of the elite theater. We didn't, or I didn't, we wanted to be doing our own thing all the time. So I'm understanding this better and better. It doesn't mean that I'm always joyful about some of the, I really loathe the impulse to cancel people, and that whole cultural phenomenon is, and I see it coming to an end. I do. I see there being now a real actual ability to talk about it now, and to say, well, I don't believe in cancel culture. And, not very long ago, and I'm talking a year, you'd get canceled for saying, I don't believe in cancel culture.
Yes, you would. Yeah.
And so, this is because these things are extremely sensitive. And I'll tell you, this is the time to see people of color on stages. I work with a lot of people of color, and man, it's just fantastic to me when I hear these the stories of, I saw myself on stage. It's very meaningful to me to have a young Filipino woman performing and being a knockout on a stage, and knowing that young Filipinos, audience members, are going to see her and go like, oh, cool. And that it's not just a super white place.
Yeah, so there's a certain amount of responsibility that the live arts assume, responsibility to in some way model, like show what's possible in terms of individual expression and all of that. And that takes us into that part of the theater that's pedagogic. It's like, we're going to make you better. We're going to show you what's better, which I think it's a difficult one that
Well, of course, I mean, I don't believe a novelist should not write what they want to write. I don't believe that a brilliant drag artist, if you watch enough RuPaul's Drag Race, you'll see like how drag is entering the mainstream. And you can get away with murder as a drag artist. And, and it might just continue that way for a while. But in our world, I just think it's essential that we just be respectful for this time period and let that pendulum swing to a place where people of color make some decisions for themselves to say things like, well, I want that actor to be in my play and play that role, as opposed to a white actor. It just would be so insensitive and stupid, and also not on in terms of correcting, to take a role that a person of color, if the role is a person of color. Othello,
for example,
and probably best to be a Black man who plays that role, a Black man.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's probably who should play Othello. Probably more than a Black woman or anybody, but definitely should be a Black man.
Thank you, Denise. I'm gonna look at the questions now, and so here's a question for you from Colleen. How can communities create more inclusivity in the arts?
Well, exactly what we're talking about. You just have to make opportunity. I work with immigrant women, and that's an outreach that I'm part of something called the Shoe Project. And then I work very closely with immigrant women, and it's really, really cool work because it reflects back to me what my city now is. And it helps me understand like what they go through. And they feel more comfortable coming to the theater because now they know me. But they wouldn't have if I hadn't actually, with my face, been away, across the table from them, working with them in terms of like how to speak in public and how to present their story of how they immigrated, and through the lens of a pair of shoes. And so, and in a safe way, and it was just such beautiful work. And so those exchanges have to happen. And those are the exciting parts of the change, is that all Canadians, everybody, every person in a country who has some privilege and some comfort, who has lived there, should be always working with those who are joining us, the newcomers. We're all settlers, except for Indigenous folks.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for that. As we move out of our COVID world and look at the future, what positive changes do you think we will see in the performing arts?
Well, I'm still kind of, the jury's out on that one. We're of course hoping that what it will do is rejuvenate audiences and make them really love to get back into the theater. It would be great to not have to work so hard to get an audience in the performing arts. If your listeners are, know, all the performing arts have been waning for years. It's not just because of COVID, which shut us down completely. But before that, it's just been a struggle for the symphonies and for everybody to keep their houses full. And that's because we're better and better. The delivery systems for your in-home entertainment are better and better. And, you just gets cozier and cozier. And so what positive things do I see? That people will be grateful and thrilled, and that people will come back of their own volition and not be dragged. And you know what? Honestly, I don't know what else. I think it might have been a really fantastic reset button for artists too. Like a lot of theater companies who've just been busting their asses for years and years, and dance companies have had a chance to go deep and to reevaluate and to think carefully about what the future is going to be. So there's going to be some well thought out work happening.
I hope so. Yeah. Looking forward to that. How exciting.
Me too.
Another
Me
question
too.
here. What would you say to encourage artists who are struggling to find their voice?
Oh, it's such a poignant question, because whoever wrote that to me, just know this. I taught a lab for 20 years where people applied to the lab to come and study with me because of one reason. They wanted to further their voice on its path out of their bodies, and or to discover their voice, and or to bring their full expression to their voice. And every person who came to the lab, well, I'm going to say 98% of the people who came to the lab, when I asked them, now, do you tell me why you want to come here? Everybody said they wanted permission. And it just became more and more deeply moving to me. And there was often a great deal of emotion attached to the answer to that question. And I would find myself on the other end of the phone, sort of comforting someone. And I'm talking about esteemed artists wanting to come and, reboot their career. I'm talking about people just finishing their post-secondary. I'm talking about people midstream in a small town, or people living in Paris. They still craved permission. And so what would I say to someone who was hoping to further and open up their voice? I'm going to give you permission right now, viewer, to do that. And you have to hear that, and you have to give yourself permission. And you can't judge everything you do at the beginning. You've just got to start and be playful and let it begin. And don't stop yourself with, well, this is crap. You won't know till the end, and it will take some time and some development, but you just need permission, and you can get it from someone else or take it from me. The worst thing that could happen is that it'll just take you a little longer, but it'll be great to be in action.
I was struck by something that somebody said a little while ago about audacity. That is the most, well, in this person's point of view, that was the most important quality beyond the technical skills of the artist, like having the skill set in front of you. Audacity was the quality that took that art to a place where it's endangered or threatened or got to a place which created contentious disagreement, pleasure, and a fraught sense, that audacity. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a great word, but I think it's a little bit more applicable to someone who's been experimenting in the form, and or has had colleagueship and has already been dabbling and working. I think you get audacious, you get more and more audacious. The audacity factor is upped with each minor success and possibly confronting minor failures. And so that's, that kind of builds, but I don't know that it can be really that helpful for someone whose voice feels locked in them.
Right. Yeah. Following on that question about finding your voice. Yes, it's yeah, I guess I was shifting to those who may have either been given permission or found permission and are now experimenting. Yeah.
I do love the word audacity, and you have to be really careful not to let it turn into ego, not to turn into brashness, because you can always see ego on the stage and it's like, whereas an audacious experiment and an audacious exploration of something can be just, thrilling to be part of or to see.
Yeah, it risks complete failure with openness. Yeah.
Yeah.
As I think Auden said, magnificently unprepared.
Which I don't know that you can be that unprepared, WH, because, it's such a neat idea, because in fact, you have to be very prepared so that you could be magnificently unprepared.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite paradoxical. When did you feel like you were given permission? Was there a moment that you could sort of cite where you thought, oh, that's it, I need that, or I want that, or I'm going to get it? Or
I can. It's when I walked away from my commercial dance life in Montreal in 1976, literally walked away one night after just an encounter with a monster of an absolute monstre of Les Ballets Jazz, who I was like, oh my God, seriously, the person is insane, and I'm putting my well-being in her hands. And that's when I think I began to realize, well, I'm just going to do stuff. I'm just going to do shit. And I didn't even know how much I didn't know, you know what I mean? But I at least had some dance chops. I had a lot of dance chops, and I suppose that gave me the audacity I needed. But, that was glorious, those early days in Calgary of just, making spectacular, fabulous disasters on stages, and they're still coming out of it something authentic and fun and true that led us to, refine and distill. So I'm going to say way back, like for me, it was a lucky strike, just a lucky thing that I just had a weird internal confidence. There's no real reason for it.
okay, well, Yeah, I mean, thank you,
Thank
Denise.
you.
Does anybody out there in vacuum land, as Peter Zosky used to say, out there in vacuum land? No, was that Peter Zosky? Anyway, that was a CBC.
Peter Sosky, Jesus.
Yeah.
I loved him.
Anybody out there with a question for Denise? This is your moment. You can just like unmute and ask it verbally if you like, rather than going to the chat. If you have any questions, otherwise I will, carry on asking Denise questions. And while you are thinking, I will ask Denise a question. So what would you say to, Kelowna? It's about, what are we now, population 130, 40, something like that, thousand? When you grew up in Calgary, I mean, when we were, together in the 70s, I bet Calgary wasn't a whole lot bigger than that.
Yeah.
That way back in the 70s. And so, given that this is a small town, what would you say to young artists? What would you say to them? Would you say go study there, go away? Would you say,
Yeah. I would say don't just only stay in Kelowna and work. Go out and meet people, but beware of too much workshopping, because if you have any skill and talent, you should start creating it. You should start putting it to work now for yourself. Be careful about collecting some really trusted people who you can ask, what do you think, genuinely? But really, that should be a small parcel of people, because there's nothing better than having a clean palette. In today's world, you don't have to. I mean, you can watch all the work of, especially now with COVID, marquee TV. You can see the finest work in the world every day. Now that it's not dimensional, it's flat, it's on a screen, but it's well shot. And so you can open your mind to the levels and the baselines out there, the gold standards and so forth. But in fact, I say, because this is how I did it, I believe in really committing to checking out who you are now. And so you might be very fortunate that you're in Kelowna, and that I don't even know, is Kelowna affordable to live?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was the trick in Calgary. The reason it was so fantastic for me was that it was really cheap in those days to live here. And especially when the bottom dropped out of the oil industry in the 80s, that particular crash was really golden for One Yellow Rabbit as kids, because we just took off. We just built our own thing because there was nothing here.
Right.
And we loved it. Blake always called it the Liverpool paradigm. The Beatles didn't come from London, right? They came from Liverpool, which was a bigger city than Calgary, but nonetheless.
Yeah, the advantages of being further from the center. Yeah, but they are rent. It's about money. And
it's about money.
I can imagine Detroit, right? You could say go to Detroit, go to actually go to Calgary very soon, because I mean there's just like acres of empty office space now in that city. Scary.
Yeah. But that's, I'm interested. I'm really interested. I don't mean to sound glib, because I know it's a really serious situation, but I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen, because it's the only way innovation is going to happen, is out of desperation.
Yeah.
We have to diversify, and it's been, it's been talked about since Peter Lougheed's days.
Yeah.
You have to diversify, and so it's like, well, it's here.
Yeah.
Now there's no choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some positive thoughts to send all the creative bunnies off to their their work.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good. Thank you, Denise. I think we've come more or less to the end of our hour, and I'm not seeing any other questions out there.
I just have a quick one, Neil. This is Denise speaking to Denise. First of all, Denise.
Hi, Denise.
Hi. Just so wonderful to hear you speak. I don't think I've ever actually sat down and heard you speak so well on some things, probably the best I've heard someone address the whole identity politic thing, which was just fantastic. So just wonderful to hear you speak. So my question is, because do you think that there is any difference in training required now, given the landscape for performers? And if you were to change their training, now I'm talking as someone who trains at a post-secondary, right? But would you say, no, nothing's changed, we need to train them the same way we always have? Or are you thinking, okay, we've got to shift some of our ways of training performers now because of some of the ways, the platforms for performers, the landscape for performers? Are there any different things that you think they need in their toolbox? I really appreciate it. I absolutely agree with you on the workshop problem. Because I spent a lot of time in Europe and there were a lot of workshop junkies, and it can be the hungry ghost thing. At some point, you've just got to look in and figure out, what your coordinates are in the world.
Well, you do. Yeah, you do. Listen, here's what I think, Denise. I mean, I see a lot of the schools, as I know the U of C is now a school. I can't even remember its name. It has so many names. It's the School for Performing and Creative Arts but it's the school model. And I see how difficult the shift has been away from a program that is strictly an academy like setup. I forget what's the exact term that post-secondary uses for, like, dance classes and music classes.
Like conservatory style.
A conservatory.
Yeah.
So the movement away from the conservatory style of a program is probably a healthy one to some degree, but I see a lack of virtuosity being encouraged, and I see or allowed. And I think it's just because everyone is exhausted and it's so much work. So as long as the innovations in the programs to make sure that the artists are, have that diversification notion and are really thinking in terms of making their own work and devising their own thing and have the balance. I think it's so important that they're balanced with art history, maybe not even just theater art history, but, art history in general, just a sense of the world, the larger world that they are occupying.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very, very important. And an opportunity and a kind of a serious encouragement to become virtuosic in something. Because I do think that there's going to be a lot of people out there making work, and we don't want it to become banal. We want to still be able to go to a theater and go like, wow, that person, he moved unbelievably well. That was really exciting to watch that person or those people moving and or speaking the text, where you went like, what a performance of that text, or whatever it is, so that it's not just good enough to talk about your politic or your personhood, but you have to do it with an aesthetic understanding of what theater is and an expectation of the audience to be seeing something a little bit extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's nice to hear your voice. I'm just staring at your little weeny tiny head picture.
I know, my weeny tiny head. We can't take we're not allowed to.
Okay.
The host isn't allowing me to show my face.
Well,
my teeny head doesn't look as good as that photo. I can tell you that much.
Well, you do look great in your teeny weeny head picture. So listen, I really enjoyed this, you guys. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Denise. I saw somebody appear there. Karma, did you want to chime in here, Karma, before we go?
Well, I'll say thank you very much. I wanted to see if the host would let me take my camera off. which it did. We put it on. I really enjoyed the history part of this. I will admit, I was born in Calgary in 1981.
Oh, wow.
And
You were a baby when we were young hipster punks.
yeah, and my mother was teaching ballroom dancing at Arthur Murray's downtown.
Well, oh, I remember that. I remember it was on 8th Avenue, wasn't it?
Believe so. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
Fabulous.
so and now I have the challenging job of being the theater programming coordinator for the Rotary Center for the Arts. And it was fascinating to hear you speak to some of the challenges that I feel like we have here in presenting work. And I also was very inspired and have ideas for conversations I would like to have with Denise and Neil and Colleen. So
Cool.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good glasses.
Denise. I will pass this over to Colleen, I think. And do you want to stay online, Denise, for a little bit and just talk to me at the
Sure.
end? And we'll just say goodbye personally.
Okay.
So just-
Okay.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Denise, for sharing your experiences and your life stories and your many ideas and your wise ideas with us this evening. Really appreciate that you took the time out to chat to the Kelowna community. And Neil, thank you very much for guiding us through this conversation journey. We welcome Neil back again next month. So mark your calendars for our next Art Talk, which is on, again, it's on a Tuesday. So it's always the last Tuesday of the month, Tuesday, May the 25th. Again, at 7:30, where we welcome Artistic Director James Long to our Art Talks. And then to our audience, thank you very much for spending the last hour with us. We really appreciate that you came out. And you can watch this conversation or share it with your friends if you'd like to. It'll be on the RCA YouTube channel. So please do share within your networks. That's it for me tonight. Now we can all go dancing in the kitchen.
There you go. Pour that little cocktail and get a favorite record on. That's how old I am. I call it a record.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.